Welcome to Rappahannock Issues. I'm Tom Cohen.
And I'm David Kerr.
And we're going to be looking at topics that are of interest to our community, both regionally and to the state. Welcome to Rappahannock Issues. We have our power panel to talk about the 2015 legislative session in Virginia. Earlier we had supervisors as well as some state delegates, and we invited every one of the state delegates and senators from our area to come in to talk about the Virginia session, which is a January-February session this year. And so now that we've heard their viewpoints, we're going to go to our power panel and get their take as to what is going to happen or should happen in Richmond. We start off, we have Dr. Stephen Farnsworth from University of Mary Washington, and we also have Dr. Deirdre Condit from Virginia Commonwealth University, and rounding out the panel is our co-host of the show, David Kerr. When all the delegates came and talked to us, the biggest thing they talked about was ethics reform and ethics issues. So we might as well start in there. Deirdre?
Well, obviously, this is going to be the big issue because we have a Republican-controlled legislature and a Democratic governor, and we have a Republican governor who, on January 5th, is going to learn his sentencing. And that's going to cause the beginning of the roll toward ethics. Everyone will want to jump on board to separate themselves politically from the question of being unethical. The real issue, though, is the outside pressure, I think, that comes on members of the state legislature from the folks who are giving them the gifts. And that's what's going to modify the ultimate legislation, even as it did in March. And then the governors, or when the legislature came back and supported the governor's $100 ban at that point.
Stephen?
Well, I think it's important to realize that they're really late to this party. I think that one of the things that the legislature tried to do was offer up a half measure a year ago that would try to solve, they thought, the problem. But the verdict, which was really very strong and very powerful in the McDonald case, almost all the counts, the estimated sentence of 10 years or more for the conviction for the former governor, those things have really sobered up the lawmakers on this question of ethics and the consequences of not being strict in terms of rules. I think that, in fairness to the legislatures, as they look at some of these financial issues, they're not exactly sure where the rules are, exactly where the loopholes offer clear lines to what's legal and what's not. And I think that the McDonald case is a really powerful issue that's going to force them to move. And I tend to think they're going to move pretty quickly. I think that the last thing the lawmakers need in this abbreviated session, particularly given all the financial troubles the state's facing right now, is a protracted conversation about ethics. Come up with this plan before the legislature convenes, implement it, and move very quickly on to something else. Because every day that lawmakers talk about ethics during that 45-day session is a day in which the public will be even more frustrated with government in this state.
David?
Well, I was looking at Bill Howell's website, and he was noting that he and Senator Normand had been conversing and talking on the topic, and had come to an agreement with the leadership of the House and the leadership in the Senate about the $100 gift ban, the Ethics Commission. Do you think that this will be something that happens within the first week and then we're done? Or do you think it'll get modified in committee, that there'll be amendments?
Well, I think that if we looked at the first pass that happened last year, what we saw is that they made an attempt that was sort of a stopgap measure to say we're on the ball, right? But the problem with doing ethics reform is that if we look at the social science research, what we discover is amounts actually don't matter. So they're going to tinker between 100 to 250 to 500, and they're going to talk about what kinds of gifts in kind. They're going to talk about who's a member of the family and the extended members. But what we know from social science is it's actually the act of the giving. It doesn't even matter if I give you a $5 Starbucks card or I give you a $1,000 watch, which I'm not going to do, Tom, just so y'all know. But I'll take it in exchange. But the act of giving, that exchange, creates the encumbered relationship. And until we can sort of figure out in politics what that means, because how the lobby industry works is by taking you to lunch, taking your daughter out to dance, doing all sorts of things that create relationships, and it's that cementing of relationships. How the legislature tackles it is really, in my opinion, only going to be kind of Band-Aid. It will work. We'll do some limitations. It's already had a powerful impact on the McAuliffe administration. Governor McAuliffe is spending time writing checks to give back for people who are giving him gifts, and he's very detailed about that. So I'm more skeptical about the effectiveness than perhaps other folks are.
Well, one interesting thing about actually too, one is, as you said, legislators and bureaucrats tend to deal with the current. And so they're really just looking at this is what happened to McDonald's, so therefore we're looking right at that, and that's what we're going to address. What's more interesting to me is that they're not addressing PACs. And you have a governor who created a PAC basically to help him in this year's election so to get his side winning in November. So if I am either a wealthy person or a political action committee or a lobbyist, an evil term, of course only if it's not my lobbyist, if I'm one of those people, I can just give the money to his PAC or somebody else's PAC and get the same effect, and that's not even remotely on the radar screen. So it's interesting that the tunnel vision of, oh, this is what happened, we're going to address that, but not looking at the greater scheme.
Yeah, I tend to have a pretty cynical read on the idea that reform is really going to reform all that much. We're talking about human nature. We're talking about it being very useful financially for businesses to give money to politicians. If it weren't a good investment, they wouldn't do it. And so when you look at this, I tend to think the image of money is sort of like water in politics, that it will just flow in the direction of the politicians no matter how we try to channel it. I think that's a really good image for thinking about this. And, no doubt about it, improvements can be made. But the idea that we will be looking at a new, clean government in Virginia beyond the passage of another ethics bill, that strikes me as a pretty optimistic, unrealistic scenario.
You use a better analogy than I do. When I teach this to my intro students, I follow the toilet paper as my metaphor for following how capital flows into elections. But I'm going to switch and cop from you.
Well, the old saying, water finds its way around any object, so we'll just find it. We've seen this in Washington as well. Almost any campaign finance reform, people just find a way around it. And we're going to find a way around more other issues that are going before the Virginia legislature this session. Obviously, the budget. We have a budget issue coming up. The governor has raised the sector for the wonderful image, depending on your point of view, about Medicaid. And then we'll look at other bills that we think are interesting that are coming up. So come on back to Rappahannock Issues after this break.